Coleman Report Live. I'm Coleman, and we're talking Main Street and the small business lenders who help it grow. Chris Hearn out of Florida, thank you so much for giving up your time and
Thanks for
being with us. And Katie Roach out of undisclosed location in Northwest America. We have 11 of the new forms. Katie, what's Lance going to be talking about?
These are just some updated forms. They've changed them not too much, but there are some new sections that are definitely different that are to apply to the new SOP. So it's good to know those new sections in there and know how to correctly fill those out. I think Lance will do a great job of working everybody through that, and so they know exactly how to fill these out and what to be doing.
Very good. Let's go to the poll questions. A lot of news. Oh, by the way, if you want to register for that webinar, just drop Joseph an email at joseph@colemanreport.com, and he'll do all the logistics and all the paperwork. We do have some news that we want to go through in these interesting times. And Chris, I don't know why I'm asking this question, but we'll bring it up anyway. What changes to SBA loan programs would help small business or help Main Street the most next year?
Well, I don't know how I pick between all of those. I think all of them look good to me. I think we need all of them.
There you go. Yeah, maybe we should have had them. You wrote, the reason why I brought this up, you wrote an article. What is the advantage, very briefly, why are you advocating 90%?
Well, the Main Street lending program is at 95%. Expanding the 7A from a traditional 75% to 90 or 95% would hopefully induce more lenders to make some of these vital loans in the months ahead. Because the biggest problem for America's small businesses right now, particularly in the absence of the second draw of PPP, is going to be working capital, which can be solved with 7A funds. But in order to get the community excited about doing it and taking on more perceived risk, you're going to need to have some enhancements, such as expanded guarantees.
When you say enhanced 504 loans, what type of enhancements are you advocating?
I'm mostly advocating for the FMLP 2.0. The first, what was it called? First
mortgage loan.
Yeah, first loan mortgage program. It's something to that effect. I forget the acronym. It's over 10 years old at this point. But basically, it was a guarantee of the first lien loans of the 504, and it obviously created a secondary market for that as well. And again, same theory. It brings lenders in off the sidelines to make loans that they would otherwise not make, and that's what we need to try to help start the recovery efforts.
Chris, our audience gets younger and younger. There are a number of people not around for FMLP. Give me an FMLP 101, and why was it so advantageous for the lender as well as for Main Street?
Well, as most folks know, 504s don't have a $5 million cap project size per se, like a 7A, so you can do larger projects. You have a $5 million cap on the second lien permanent piece of the 504, or 5.5, depending on certain circumstances. But the point is, the first lien program, the first lien loan does not have a size stipulation to it. And so much like what we've done with 7A, what the government did a little over 10 years ago is they applied an 80% government guarantee to the first lien 504s. And again, that allowed a lot of lenders to come in, do slightly larger projects, maybe more special purpose projects, which were tough to get financed in the last recession and will be tough to finance now. And then the lenders would sell off that 80% government guarantee. They retain the 20%, or you can actually split the 20% into a 5% capital stack, 15% capital stack. But again, the inducement to make more loans. Otherwise, you don't have it.
Chris, this financial crisis is much different than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago was a liquidity issue. We don't have that today. We do have an issue, and we also have very low interest rates. So in terms of access to capital, do the lenders really need that, or how important is that compared to what I call PPP 2.0?
Well, I think we need to pull all the levers, and I would disagree. I'm not so sure we don't have a access to capital problem right now. In fact, looking at
notice I stumbled over my words. You may talk me out of that one real quick. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, it's not so much liquidity. I mean, I think the depository institutions are pretty flush with capital right now. The
Right.
problem is they're not deploying it. So we actually do have an access to capital issue, much like we did 10, 11 years ago. And that's what some of these programs are meant to try to spur is to provide some access to capital for small businesses who otherwise are not going to be able to tap the capital markets and may have to go out of business entirely, which sadly we've seen a lot of that. So I think PPP 2.0 it will be helpful and certainly is part of the solution, but I think we also have to plan a little bit longer term. It's going to take some time for a lot of the small to mid-sized companies to get back to where they were, and it will need more than just another 2.5 months of payroll, for instance, in a PPP 2.0.
Yeah, I'll modify my remarks. I tend to agree with you that the main issue is the lenders, the banks, the non-bank
Right.
institutions do have capital,
Right.
but they're reluctant to lend it, and I certainly understand that reluctance.
Unless it's a home mortgage, and they seem to be lending those left and right. But that's about, that and PPP is about all that's been funded over the last 9 months.
Yeah. And yeah, let's go to number 2. Katie, we're going to have you talk a little bit about hospitality and franchises. But Chris, I guess the first question is, you are still bullish. I apologize for putting words in your mouth, but you are still doing things in the hospitality industry. What is, when you look at these transactions, obviously you're looking at all 5 of them, as you said, but what is your most number one concern?
Well, we're looking for, post-closing liquidity. We're looking for experience. We're looking for feasibility, making sure that it makes sense to do the project. We're clearly looking for seeing how if it's a project that's an acquisition or refinance, we're looking to see how they performed, during the down months of the pandemic, the shutdown months, to see how adaptive they were and what they look like on a go-forward basis. So, it's one thing to look at the numbers from April, May, June. It's a whole nother matter to look at the numbers in August, September, October. And if they've turned the corner a little bit, then, and all those other boxes get checked, then it may be a transaction that we'll do. But it's tough right now to do hospitality financing for anyone.
2 questions. Business acquisition, are you seeing much of a haircut on the values of these transactions?
Business acquisitions, hospitality generally we don't. Yeah, we wouldn't do a business valuation on a hospitality project, but I haven't really seen haircuts on business valuations. I am starting to see some haircuts come in terms of the appraised values on hospitality projects. Not severe. I mean, I'm seeing 10, 15%. But again, depending on how long this crisis goes, those numbers could double or could more. I mean, it's, the business traveler is not out there much anymore. And the leisure traveler is very reluctant to go out there right now. And until those 2 things change, it's going to be tough to see, occupancy and ADR and RevPAR go back to where we would expect it to be.
What about construction?
I'm sorry, you broke up, Bob. Say that again.
What about construction? Will you look at, obviously you'll look at it, but will you fund construction transactions?
We will, very selectively. I mean, it's going to depend on all those factors.
Average equity involved?
I would say at least 20%. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, through a 504 at least. If we were to do it conventionally, we'd probably need at least 35-40%.
I remember we did our hospitality webinar, Katie, about 12 years ago, and any hospitality transaction had to be through SBA. If you couldn't do it through SBA, you couldn't do it. Chris, real quick, you may know that, or Katie may know that. What is the percentage of transactions that are SBA versus conventional?
Well, you have to break down the market, Bob. I think my experienced answer would be in the limited service flagged hospitality arena. My guess is probably close to 50% of all projects are financed with SBA, the predominance being 504.
Define limited service.
Limited service, meaning you don't have like a full service kitchen, restaurant, that sort of a thing. So your typical, Holiday Inn Express, your Courtyard Marriott, generally your Courtyard Marriott prototypes, your Best Westerns, your Hiltons, things like that.
They'll throw a little breakfast buffet at you, but you can't do down
Exactly.
dinner, no bar.
You can't get room service. Let's put it that way. That's an easy way to define it. You can't go get room service.
Yeah.
You have to take your
Katie,
little
what is
thing up to the
Katie, what is RevPAR? I should probably, do you know what RevPAR is, Katie?
It is. It's revenue per available room is what it means.
Oh, very good.
And yeah, for a while I was writing specifically on hotels, so I've kind of learned a lot of the lingo. I know it changes a lot, and especially if you're not one of those lenders who specializes in this, you might not hear it very often. Unfortunately, during the height of the pandemic, I saw it drop down to below $8 per room. It's just really sad because, I mean, like, you have a customer, first off, you're not even going to get that many customers during the height of the pandemic. But when they did get it, that's really not enough to even pay the salary for one employee.
That's hospitality definitely needed. Yeah.
It is increasing again. I don't know what the going rate is, but it's definitely not back to where it was pre-pandemic yet.
Joseph, can you put the results back up on the board, please? Decreasing 30%, increasing 10%. Chris, is that in line with what you're seeing out in the marketplace?
No, actually it's not. I mean, I think RevPAR is actually increasing these days in most markets because I think the worst of the pandemic has kind of been behind us. I'm not saying we're not going to have another surge coming up. It's possible, of course, but I think the last couple months, RevPAR has definitely been increasing. So I'm a little surprised to see some folks. Yeah.
Really interesting. But what markets are you looking at?
Oh, I'm looking nationally. I mean, I think all over the place. Even here in Orlando, where I'm based, RevPAR is definitely up. Travel has definitely started to come back a bit. Nowhere near what would be normal, but certainly it's coming back. It's headed in the right direction.
Okay, very good. Chris penned an article, is picked up by Forbes, I believe. And Chris, what are you trying to convey to Main Street, to the regulators? This is really aimed for not necessarily SBA, but for Congress.
Yeah, I just think there's, PPP has just sucked the oxygen out of the room for the last 6 to 8 months, 9 months, whatever it's been, and followed closely by Main Street lending. And, I think I'm trying to remind some of the decision makers in Capitol Hill that there's other programs that are very effective, that have shown time and again in times of crisis that they've been able to step up and really help out. And, much like what we've done in the past, we do need to make some enhancements, however, to some of these programs to really optimize their effectiveness during these critical times. And so that's really what I was trying to do, Bob, is just talk about some practical solutions that I think definitely should be part of this. And frankly, it's good to know that, one of my senators here in Florida who chairs the Senate Small Business Committee, Marco Rubio, actually has introduced a bill a couple weeks ago that actually supports and talks about some of these things. So I think I'm not going to be surprised if it won't happen in the lame duck session of Congress between now and January, but I won't be surprised if in the new Congress we get some traction on some of these things. And I do think it's well overdue.
Katie, do you agree with Chris? Do you agree that nothing's going to happen between now and the new week of January?
Mm-hmm.
And my question, well, first, let me ask you that. Do you agree with that, Katie?
I have to say I am leaning toward what Chris is saying. I don't think we're probably going to get too much. Maybe some changes on a lower level. Maybe SBA might send us some new forms and things like that. But I don't think we're going to see large congressional changes before before we change over to the new congressional group in January.
For both of you, with the news of the past week, has there been any changes from a bipartisan support for all these programs that we were talking about before the election? Has the election changed anybody's thinking of that? Shaking his head.
I think what you're asking, Bob, you broke up there for a second, is I think you asked if anything's changed in the last week in terms of bipartisan support for SBA programs.
That's exactly what I meant.
Yeah, I would say no. I think again, it's one of the few things that everybody in Congress, for the most part, seems to agree upon. There's fringes on either side, but for the most part, everybody supports SBA as they should. 44% of the American GDP is created by small to mid-sized businesses, and it'd be pretty hard to be an elected leader and be against that.
Katie?
Chris is exactly right. I have not heard anybody change their opinions on that. I think small businesses are really the backbone of our economy right now, and I don't know why anybody in Congress would be against that. I think they just need to find things that they can agree on, put it all together, and then we'll have some new bills.
Yep.
Well, hopefully Main Street can hang on for another 2 months. We hear positive things about vaccines and things like that. So, there is positive stuff on the horizon. Real quick, Katie, talk to me about franchising. How has this pandemic affected franchise performance?
So unfortunately, these numbers are all pre-pandemic going into it. And I think probably based on the data I've seen, things like Pizza Hut and Domino's and all those places probably bumped up a little higher than where they were on that list. Because there was a lot of takeout, a lot within the food service in general and takeout. So I'm guessing that's going to be higher coming out of this than it was going in. I think also there was on that list was some hardware things, home renovations and things like that is up during the pandemic. So I would imagine coming out of this, we're going to see more in that area.
As the data comes in, we're gonna focus more and more on these stats between now and the balance of the year.
This is unfortunately all right before it all hit. So I think things like the fitness brands and things like that, unfortunately, probably took a little bit of a hit during this.
Yeah.
We have some questions, Chris. If there's a balance, this is from Andrea. If there's a balance on a PPP loan and we've moved the due date out 10 months, as SBA has directed us to do this, when is the first due date, and does it revert back to the original loan docs? In other words, how do I document this?
Well, it should be within, I think it should be within the 10 months that SBA's moved it out to. That's what I would say. Reverting back to the original loan docs, I'm not really sure what Andrew means in that case, but the loan docs aren't being changed. Just because you get forgiveness on a portion of the loan doesn't mean you're changing anything. Yeah.
Andrea says, what if they want a 3-year amortization?
Can't do a 3-year amortization on a PPP loan. You can only do a 2-year if it was done pre-June 5th or a 5-year if it was after that.
Chris Martin says, Chris, there may be access to capital issues. It is the regulations that are making it so restrictive, that are making it difficult for us to make lending to small businesses.
I don't disagree. I think that's always the issue. This is, in times like this, the regulators clamp down, and of course, if you're a regulated entity, then you've got to comply with that, and of course, that forces access to capital issues. And so, how do you mitigate that? And one way is to be able to counter it by saying, well, but we're getting 100%. Or 90% or 75% government guarantee, and this is why this would make sense. And hopefully we don't have situations like we've had in the past where we have regulators from the state and the federal level pointing fingers at each other and not all on the same page. That is something that's always concerns me, is that different regulators have different interpretations when we really need them all singing from the same hymnal.
Russell says deferment ends when we do have a forgiveness by SBA. So then that needs to be resolved, but there's a balance. Vicky asks a question we've always asked. We don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. Maybe Chris does. But if we get forgiveness payment on a loan, is there any risk of a clawback by SBA to the lender through a review process when it's paid off? I mean, risk. What type of risk are you anticipating, Chris?
Well, SBA, I think, has been pretty outspoken about this in terms of clawbacks on PPP loans. I mean, there's issues of eligibility. Should the loan have been made to begin with? Was it correct in terms of the forgiveness determination by the lender? I mean, both of those instances could result in clawbacks. So yeah, I think there is the risk, and this is why it's important for people obviously to have gone through some of your programs, Bob, or make sure that they pay attention to the regs. They read them carefully. They make sure they have their own internal loan policy on how to do these things. Unfortunately, there was still a few gray areas regarding PPP, so the lending community did have to make some their own rules to some extent and interpret them accordingly. But I think a lot of that's getting fleshed out, and I think if the lending community applied practical common sense, then I think SBA is hopefully going to go along with
materiality is important. I would pay much more attention to a $2 million
absolutely
app than a $30,000 forgiveness app.
Yes, for sure. I don't think there's that many people that committed fraud over $30,000 PPP loan, but you start getting over $500,000 or more, and I think that's where a lot of the fraud comes into play.
Raman says, are idle loans assumable? We had this discussion yesterday upon the sale of a business. Interesting question in that the loans are to the business. There's no personal guarantee. Can the buyer assume the loan? Lance punted yesterday and said, ask SBA. Chris, do you have an opinion about that?
No, if the great Lance Sexton punted, I think I have to punt on this. I'm not really sure. I mean, really, idle loans, they're made by SBA and I'd have to delve deep into the regs on them, but it seems like they would be assumable given that all other SBA loans can be assumable, but I don't know. I think I'd ask your
because it doesn't make sense to me that a buyer would then have to be on the hook for that loan. I don't know. I mean, these are interesting questions on that. Hey, we are dark tomorrow, so a happy Remembrance Day, Veterans Day, and we will be back on Thursday. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Katie,
thanks for having me.
Great insight as always. And thank you for joining us today for Coleman Report Live and for supporting America's Main Street, one entrepreneur at a time.
Have a great day.
All right.